I write this letter to you for the sake of the taxpayer, as well as your time. Those 3 dudes you have in custody are just talking to get publicity for the Otero murders. They know nothing at all. I did it all by myself and with no one's help. There has been no talk either. Let's put it straight. Joe, position, southwest bedroom, feet tied to bed, head pointed in a southerly direction. Bondage, window, blind cord. Garrote, blind cord, brown belt. Death, the old bag trick, and strangulation with clothesline rope. Clothes, white sweatshirt, green pants. Comments, he threw up at one time. Had rib injury from wreck few week before, lying on coat. Julie, position, laying on her back crosswise on the bed, pointed in a southwestern direction, face cover with pillow. Bondage, blind cord. Garrote, clothesline cord tie in clove hitch. Death, strangulation twice. Clothes, blue house coat, black slack, white sock. Comments, blood on face from too much pressure on the neck, bed unmade. Josephine, position, hanging by the neck in the northwest part of the basement, dryer or freezer north of body. Bondage, hand tie with blind cord. Feet and lower knees, upper knees, and waist with clothesline cord, all one length. Garrote, rough hemp rope, 1/4 inch diameter. Noose with 4 or 5 turns, new. Clothes, dark, bra cut in middle, sock. Death, strangulation once, hung. Comments, rest of her clothes, bottom of the stairs, green pants and panties. Her glasses in the southwest bedroom. Joseph, position, in the east bedroom, laying on his back, pointed in an eastern direction. Bondage, blind cord. Garrote, 3 hoods, white t-shirt, white plastic bag, another t-shirt. Death, suffocation once, strangulation, suffocation with the old bag trick. Clothes, brown pants, yellow-brown striped t-shirt. Comments, his radio is blaring. All victims had their hands tied behind their backs. Gags of pillowcase material. Slip knots on Joe and Joseph's neck to hold leg down, or was at one time. Purse contents south of the table. Spilled drink in the area also. Kids making lunch. Door shade in red chair in the living room. Otero's watch missing. I needed one, so I took it. Runs good. Thermostat turned down. Car was dirty inside, out of gas. I'm sorry this happened to society. They are the ones who suffer the most. It's hard to control myself. You probably call me psychotic with sexual perversion hang up. Where this monster entered my brain, I will never know. But it here to stay. How does one cure himself? If you ask for help, that you have killed 4 people, they will laugh and hit the panic button and call the cops. I can't stop it. So the monster goes on and hurt me as well as society. Society can be thankful that there are ways for people like me to relieve myself at time by daydreams of some victim being tortured and being mine. It a big complicated game, my friend, of the monster playing putting victims' numbers down, follow them, checking up on them, waiting in the dark, waiting. The pressure is great, and sometimes he runs the game to his liking. Maybe you can stop him. I can't. He has already chosen his next victim or victims. I don't know who they are yet. The next day after I read the paper, I will know, but it's too late. Good luck hunting. Yours truly, guiltily. P.S. Since sex criminals do not change their MO or by nature cannot do so, I will not change mine. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. You see at it again. They will be on the next victim. Welcome to the True Crime Librarian. I'm your librarian and host, Ashley. Tonight we enter the dark world of Dennis Lynn Rader. Dennis had an uncanny ability to blend into his community and carry one of the longest reign of terror in American history. Right in the heartland of America, the town of Wichita, Kansas. His ability to blend in and his self-control baffle police and psychologists both to this day. In order to not only understand why the MO was bind, torture, kill, but to understand how he was able to be active and then lay dormant until pride overtook him and he fell into the hands of baffled law enforcement who patiently awaited one misstep on his part. Stick with me as we explore the notorious serial killer, BTK. Warning. This episode contains graphic detail of sexual fantasies, perversion, torture, murder, and adult language. Listeners' discretion is advised. If you feel any of this may be too much for you, please skip this episode or have someone listen with you or for you. Good evening, everyone. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we dive deep into our first look with the librarian and this notorious serial killer. First, a little shout out to a few of my true crime nerds: Shelly, Caroline, Jenny, Tom, Pam, and Trell. If you'd like to make it on the weekly True Crime Nerd shout out, please leave a review of the True Crime Librarian so that other nerds like yourself can find the show. This is the easiest and cheapest way to support the show. Last week, we hit a few milestones with the True Crime Librarian, and as a result, I handed out a 15% off promo code for the Librarian merch store. Use the promo code 5KGOAL, that's the number 5KGOAL, one word, to get 15% off your order with the True Crime Librarian gear. Don't forget to head over after this episode and take a look around and maybe pick yourself something up and support the show all at one time. Now let's get down to why you're all here, and that is the true crime. All right, let me introduce you to Dennis Lynn Rader. He was born March 9th, 1945. Currently, he is 75. He will turn 76 in March. He is still sitting in a maximum security prison. We'll go into that a little later. He was the firstborn to Dorothea May Rader and William or Bill Elvin Rader. He's one of 4 boys. He's got siblings Jeff, Paul, and Bill. Dennis, he was born in Pittsburgh, Kansas. However, the family moved to Wichita, Kansas when he was young, and he grew up in Wichita. Dennis's father, Bill, worked for the Kansas Gas and Electric, and Dorothea, she was a bookkeeper for IGA Superstore. And it is said that Dorothea was the disciplinarian in the home, and this leads to Dennis having a poor relationship with her. Dennis also claims that when she would whip him, not only would he feel the pain, but he would have an almost arousal feeling that accompanied that pain. It was a turn on for Dennis. And he began to realize that something was different with him from a very young age. And when we look at this and we look at Dennis and you look at other serial killers, and how many times do you see where they have a strained relationship with a parent? 9 times out of 10, that is the mother. We see this pattern emerge. And that's where the whole nature versus nurture debate comes out, and it always will. Were you born a monster, or were you created into a monster? I think it has a little bit of both. However, seeing that they constantly have this rift with their mothers, sometimes it is the fathers, very rarely, but sometimes it is. But having that lack of connection with the person who gave you life seems to be the most detrimental on the development of a child. That they constantly have this need to be heard, this need to be seen, not necessarily understood, but I want you to see me for who I am. Do you see me, Mom? Are you listening to me, Mother? Can I get your approval, Mom? That's what all of this seems to boil down to when you're breaking down the psychology of notorious serial killers. Now, Dennis, he seemingly had this like normal childhood. He had a few events that will stand out, and those can play a major role in shaping who he is. But in all, he did what every other kid did in the 1950s. You go outside, you play until the sun goes down, you come in, wash up, you eat dinner with your family, and you spend the rest of the evening with your family. Dennis, he was labeled as normal. He was labeled as polite, as well-mannered. But those who knew him said he could blend in without anyone ever noticing he was there if he wanted to. Now, Dennis joined Boy Scouts of America, and this brought forth his hobby. I'm going to say it's a hobby. He loved to tie knots. And thanks to the Boy Scouts, he was able to learn several different variations of knots. And this leads and plays a major role in his adult life later on. Around the age of 8, Dennis, he admits to having maybe his very first true memory of being thrilled by the act of torture. Dennis's grandmother, she would go out and she would kill a chicken for that evening's supper. And Dennis would go with her, and so would the other boys. The other boys and his cousins, they would all follow grandmother out until blood started going everywhere, and then everybody ran off except for Dennis. He watched his grandmother take the chicken, tie their legs together with a leather shoestring, and then cut the heads off. Now, like I said, Jeff, Paul, Bill, and the cousins, they took off at the sight of blood. Nope, we're done. Dennis stayed. Dennis watched. Dennis would also say this was the pivotal point in life when he was like, I am different than everybody else. Now, Dennis, he went on to have, like I said, he'd go fishing, he would go hunting. Dennis was drawn more to outdoors activities that did not involve sports. He wasn't much of an athlete at all. So he would do other things that normal boys would do. But he experienced his very first bondage with sexual gratification in the 5th grade. He was, 10, 11 at the time? And in the 5th grade, he had a teacher, and she was known for being strict. And she was known for, if you got up to the board and you couldn't answer her question, if you weren't following along with her lecture, she would embarrass you right there in front of everybody. And Dennis hated this. He loathed her. He couldn't stand her. And so he kind of started following her around. And then somewhere right after 5th grade or right after 6th grade started, Dennis stood in the tree line behind this teacher's home. And he had brought with him rope. And in any interview that he talks about this, which is not very often, this is something he tends to hold on to himself more so than the actual crimes he commits later in life. But Dennis says for whatever reason, he had rope and he had cinched it around his waist. And he's watching this teacher go through her evening routine. And he slowly starts to cinch that rope around his waist, tighter and tighter and tighter. And then he has his very first sexual release. And Dennis wasn't really sure what to think about this. He wasn't aware of what his body was doing until he got home and noticed there was a stain in his underwear. And so he takes his boxers off and he does what every young boy does that goes through that. That's an embarrassing moment. You don't want your mother to wash your underwear and see this because you're not sure that what happened is a natural thing. So he does what all boys do. He tries to wash the stain out and it doesn't come out. So next option is bury it deep inside the laundry. And that way, hopefully, maybe mom will overlook it as she's washing clothing, right? Unfortunately for Dennis, Dorothea did not overlook this. And when she saw the stain, she made it very known to Bill, Dennis's father, what Dennis had been doing. They thought he had been masturbating. However, during that experience where he had that first release, he never once physically touched his penis or himself in any other sexual way. It was the rope and that tightening and that drag across his body that caused his excitement. So Dennis knew that wasn't natural. That's not a normal thing. And then to have his father come to him and tell him, your mother told me that you've been masturbating and we don't do that. You don't do that. You're not supposed to touch yourself in that form or fashion. It's almost a gross thing to be doing. And during that time, it's 1953, 1954. Sex is not viewed as openly as it is today. And therefore, masturbation is not viewed in the same light that it is today. Back then, it was that there's absolutely no options. No, you just don't do it. It was the same with premarital sex, abstinence. You just don't. You don't need birth control because you're not going to do it. Just so as a young boy, don't touch yourself. That's against the way of life. Instead of Dennis being humiliated and having this anger towards his father, he ends up being angry at his mother because he knows his mother found the underwear and his mother is the one that had to tell his dad. And then his mother made his dad talk to him, therefore completely humiliating him. So it all went back to his connection and his bond with his mother. And he ties this dad had to talk to me about this, and that's so embarrassing moment to his mother. And it's from this point on that Dennis starts to harbor a secret. And he's now using rope, just the feel of rope, the mention of rope, the look of rope. It excites him sexually. And then his masturbation. All of this stem from just this moment with him and watching his teacher. So we've got voyeurism, we've got the rope, we've got sexual fantasies, and now we're going to start fantasizing about tying up girls and having his way with him. And so Dennis eventually moves his activity to the basement of the home where he can tie himself up, he can masturbate, and he uses old rags and old clothing as a way to clean that up so that his mother never suspects him of that activity again. Like I had told you before, Dennis always took to fishing and hunting more than anything else. And close friends with Dennis said that the odd thing about him is when, like, if they were out fishing and there was a snapping turtle that was just being a nuisance, it was stealing the bait off the hooks or kept tying up the line. You can't really catch any fish if you got a turtle snapping around, playing big bad macho under the water. And most boys, they kill the turtle, the snapping turtles, and they do so by, I don't know, bashing the head in with a rock. And I know that's very graphic. But back then, animal cruelty was not viewed as a potential terrible trait of a human. Does that make sense? We don't have the McDonald triad just yet. So killing a turtle that is inhibiting you from catching fish or whatever, that wasn't viewed the same it is today. But what was weird about Dennis killing the turtles is he didn't do so in a manner that would cause a quick death. He would like to string them up and hang them. Dennis also admits to hanging like cats and dogs and other animals in different rundown barns or, dilapidated barns or whatever. He liked to hang his animals. Like I said, there wasn't the McDonald triad at this point, but now that we do have it, looking back, he's very prominent in that attribute. He didn't really have an issue with bedwetting, and as far as I'm aware, Dennis never played with fire. So we only had this one very strong point in this triangle of possible, deranged serial killer, right? Nowhere when the triad was made, nowhere did it say it needed to have 1, 2, or 3 of those points. It just said, these are the 3 things we see consistently in those who commit multiple murders. And Dennis only had 1. Now, when he was 13, 16 years old, he worked in a local welding shop, and he just did things around the shop that the owner needed. But the owner had a daughter that was a senior in high school, or no, she was a junior in high school. And Dennis was simply just a freshman when he first started working at the shop. And prior to working there, the girl had gone through what would be more of a tomboy phase. And then with Dennis working there, she gradually switched into one of those girls who begins to care about the way she looks, who likes to wear very form-fitting clothing, who just does not realize that there are boys that are fantasizing. And if they are, it's not the girl's position to make sure they dress appropriately so that a boy or a man doesn't have these unruly thoughts and can't hold, self-control goes both ways. So for Dennis, he knew he couldn't have her. He knew he couldn't date. He knew they could never have any sort of relationship other than a mutual friendship from him working for her father. But that didn't stop Dennis. He dreamed and fascinated about tying her up and doing with her what he pleases, none of it being consensual. But it didn't stop there either, because the wife of the welding shop owner, she dressed provocatively, wearing tube tops and tight clothing around the shop. And so it didn't limit his fantasies to being just the daughter. He was also doing the fantasies with the wife. But because they were untouchable, they were these things that he could never harbor never have, it intensified that desire to tie them up, to touch them, to just do unnatural sexual things too, right? In the end, he never once does anything harmful to either the daughter or the wife, and life goes on. Well, in 1959, 1960, Dennis decides he's going to commit his first breaking and entering, or B&E. And he does so at his high school. His intentions are going in and he's going to find some girls' things, touch them, maybe take one that wouldn't be missed if it, went missing. That idea of him touching her stuff without her knowing, him taking something from her that she would not miss, that control he would almost have every time she opened her locker or went through her desk or whatever. He would know that he was there and she didn't know that. And that excited him sexually. So Dennis, he drops into the school through a skylight, kind of Mission Impossible style, and he starts going through the school. And he brings with him what I would say is probably a very early prototype of what's known as his hit kit. And in that, he's got things to break in, a flashlight. It has tape over it, except for a little bitty pinpoint. That way he still has light, but it's not this huge beam notifying to somebody, hey, there's a beam of light just moving around in the school over there. So he still had some light, but he has some rope. He's got a couple pocket knives, and he goes into the school and he goes through some teachers' things. He doesn't take anything. He does find a fellow peer that is a female. He goes through her things, but he doesn't take with him a trophy. He leaves her things exactly the way he found them. And then he does something that just, I think, is just a haha, I did, I have to leave behind that I was here kind of thing. And instead of writing on the blackboard with his right hand, he writes something on the blackboard with his left. And that way nobody can be like, well, Dennis wrote that. So all in all, this whole little event only took about an hour. But for Dennis, this taught him quite a bit, how to move about without being noticed, how to plan, and how to bring with him things he may need. This is Dennis perfecting what will be later known as an MO for BTK. In 1963, Dennis graduates from Wichita Heights High School. And for a while, Dennis, he worked at the supermarket where his mother worked. He kind of held all these various jobs. He never held on to anything too long. And in 1965, he decides that he's going to go to college at Kansas Wesleyan College. So he gets over there. He can't stay at home because that college campus is far enough away. He can't live at home with his parents. So he's on his own. And he manages only 2 semesters before he decides to drop out. So in 1966, once he's decided college is not for him, he joins the Air Force. Now, this may be some way of him seeking direction in life, but he was also raised with a military background. His father was a Marine prior to Dennis being born, and therefore we know somebody who served in the military, and they have a very unique way in life. They're very disciplined. They have this almost minute to minute routine. You could probably set your watch by most people who come from the military. And Dennis, he's no different. He grew up with a father very strict. So maybe for him, the Air Force would offer him some sort of direction, because at this point, he wasn't really sure what he wanted to do with life. And his father was a Marine. His father fought for the country. Why couldn't he? So he goes and he ups and he joins the Air Force. Now, Dennis, he goes to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio to complete basic training. Then he heads over to Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, and does his technical training. And Dennis ends up working on antennas and things like that within the Air Force. But in 1967, Dennis is stationed at Brookley Air Force Base in Mobile, Alabama. He will not be there very long, as he receives orders for Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, Japan, in January of 1968. Dennis is moved frequently through his short military career, because by July of 1968, they have now moved him further inland, and he's at the Takakawa Air Force Base, and I probably said that wrong. Please forgive me. I'm horrible at pronouncing things. So Dennis is inland in Tokyo, Japan at this point, and it's not long before he decides the military isn't for him. Dennis serves 4 years active military before he is honorably discharged from the Air Force. Dennis is awarded the Air Force Good Conduct Medal, the Small Arms Expert Marksmanship Ribbon, and the National Defense Service Medal. Dennis does decide to serve 2 additional years inside of the Air Force Reserves. On May 22nd of 1971, Dennis marries Paula Dietz. Paula was 23, just 3 years younger than Dennis, who was 26. As you can see, he sees that there's certain levels in life you have to complete. And he tried the college thing after high school, because at that point, putting your children through college with hopes that they will go and better their life more so than what you were able to give them, that is the goal, right? So he goes to college, but quickly learns, college isn't for me. I don't think so. I'm done. So he joins the military. And during that time, most boys who have no direction, they're pointed towards the military in hopes that they will go serve their country for 4, 6, 8, 30 years, whatever that man decides to do. But that's the end goal. We're sending a boy in, and we're going to hope that we get a man back. So for Dennis, it was just another step in life he needed to complete. It was something that would keep him normal, if that's what you want to call it. I wouldn't call it normal, because the more you look at Dennis Rader, the more you learn there's anything normal about him. So in 1972, Dennis Rader lands a job with one of Wichita, Kansas' biggest employers, the Coleman Company. You know the Coleman Company. They make camping gear and things like that. And Dennis works there for a very short 13 months. In 1973, Dennis finally graduates from Butler County Community College, where he was taking night classes to earn his associate's degree in electronics. Now, I told you while he was in the Air Force, he worked on antennas and things like that. So when he went into community college, he just furthered the education he received in the Air Force. And that fall, he begins to start taking courses at Wichita State University. And I don't know if this was just like an ironic joke to himself, but Dennis begins taking classes in criminal justice. And he never had a desire to become a police officer. He never was going to become some big hotshot detective. That's not who he was. However, he's strongly battling these urges, these sexual perversions that he has. And maybe he feels like at some point he's going to act these out on another human being. And maybe if I know enough about the way law enforcement works, I can get away with this, right? I think that's where his mindset was when he decided to start taking classes over at Wichita State University. In January of 1974, Dennis was between jobs. And because he was between jobs, his wife still had her job. She was a bookkeeper, just like his mother, but she did not like to drive in snow. Well, Wichita, Kansas is located in the heartland of America. There's snow on the ground more frequently in the winter than there's not. So at this time, Dennis is taking his wife back and forth to work. And then he sees Julie Otero for the first time. And inside the car is one of her daughters, but Dennis just assumed she only had one daughter, as her daughter Carmen and Josie looked a lot alike. And Dennis had always had this natural attraction to a Hispanic woman. And so when he first sees the Otero women, he is drawn. He wants to know more about them. Well, he's in between jobs. Why not just stalk them? And that's exactly what Dennis Rader decides he's going to do. And he starts to watch the Oteros after he takes his wife to work. Learn their pattern. Learn their routine. Learn everything he can. Because then he can use that to his advantage. On January 15th, 1974, Joe Otero, who had recently retired from the United States Air Force and had just moved his family to Wichita, Kansas just 10 weeks before in November of 1973. And at this point, Joe had found a job at a nearby airport where he was an aircraft maintenance mechanic, and he was also a flight instructor. And so, but at this point, on January 15th, Joe was not actually working. He had wrecked his car just a few days prior in an accident with the weather. And so his car was in the shop and Joe was banged up, so he wasn't going to work. He had a couple broken ribs and some other injuries. So this morning, Julie is at home with her youngest, Joey, who is 9, and Josie, who is 11. And when Dennis saw Joe leave, he was taking the older Otero children, Charlie, Danny, and Carmen, to school. And so the routine that Dennis had been watching, he knew that Dennis would go to work at 8 a.m. and the kids would go to school, the older kids, Charlie, Danny, and Carmen, they would go to school. And then about 8:45, Julie would leave the home and take the younger kids, Josie and Joey, to school. However, what Dennis failed to realize in all the time that he watched this family is that Carmen and Josie were two different people. He never realized that it wasn't just Joe, his 3 sons, his daughter, and his wife. He didn't realize it was Joe, his 3 sons, 2 daughters, and wife. So on this morning, he walks up to the garage where the Oteros parked their car, and the door is open, and he sees that Julie's car is in the garage, but Joe's car is not. So he already assumes that Joe is gone. It's about 8:20 in the morning, and he crunches up to the back of the Otero's house. And they have a fenced-in backyard where they generally would put their family dog out. And Dennis climbs over the fence. He goes up to the back of the house, pulls out his knife, his hunting knife, and he cuts the telephone cord, effectively disabling the landline system inside the home. And just as he's getting ready to stand up and prepare to go into the home, the back screen door opens and out runs Lucky, the family dog, runs right past Dennis, causing him to drop the knife. And it's in that split moment Dennis makes the decision to go in the home. So he draws out his .22 pistol and he goes in through the back door. And when he walks into the kitchen, there sitting at the dining room table is Joe, Joey, Josie, and Julie. They're all in the kitchen. Joey and Josie are making their lunches for school. And Joe is sitting at the table, and Julie was in the middle of doing another task in the kitchen. And everybody stops and they look at Dennis. This man just walked into the back door of our house. Dennis says, "I'm a wanted man. Do as I say and no one will get hurt." And Joe at first thinks, well, what kind of joke is this? Who put you up to it? And he starts labeling off coworkers and friends. And Dennis finally shuts him down and he's like, this is not a joke. This is serious. And so all 4 Otero members of the family are escorted into the living room where Dennis starts to pull out items from his hit kit. He has 2 pistols. He has 2 knives. One of them are currently laying in the backyard of the home because he dropped it. He has different lengths of Venetian blind cords. They're already tied in some of his favorite knots. They're pre-cut. He has rolls of duct tape, rolls of electrical tape, and an endless supply of plastic bags. He's wearing this poncho, this oversized parka, and he's got all this stuff just stuffed into the pockets of this thing. And so he has this pistol, this 22 caliber semi-automatic Colt Woodsman. It's a preferred pistol by hitmen everywhere. And so he's got this drawn. He's escorted the family into the living room and makes them all lay down. And once they are all on the ground, Dennis realizes he's going to have to kill them all. I'm standing here without a mask on. They can identify me. And I can't leave behind any witnesses. So Dennis tells him, I just need money. I need food. I need a car. Do what I tell you to, and no one's going to get hurt. Josie's crying at this point. Joe's still in shock that it's not this joke that he was hoping it was going to be. And Dennis puts his pistol down and starts to pull out these different lengths of cord and is essentially hog tying the family. So he's tying their arms behind their back, and then he's tying their ankles together. And then from what I gather from crime scene photos and the little things I can find very specific to just the Oterios, is there's a cord that runs the tie between the hands and the tie between their ankles. So there's a string that connects these 2 points of binding. And so once he gets them all tied up by their hands and their ankles, he decides that he is going to move them to the master bedroom. At this point, it's about 8:40 in the morning, and time is going by far faster than he had anticipated. And the Oterios, they're complaining that their restraints are too tight and circulation is beginning to be cut off to their hands and feet, and it's hurting. Now, these complaints, they fall on deaf ears. Dennis doesn't really care that their hands and feet are starting to hurt from lack of circulation. However, he does hear Joe when he complains that laying on his stomach across the floor is painful because of a couple of his broken ribs. So he gets a jacket and kind of folds it up and stuffs it up under Joe to make him more comfortable. And it's weird to see this kind of thing coming out of the crime, because for a man who is very driven by these desires to be in control, he shows some sort of compassion. But in the end of the day, I mean, the reason he's doing so is in his mind, if he can keep the situation calm, he stays in control. So he's trying to soothe them and say, you know, I'm not here to kill you. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to get some money, get some food, get a car. I got to get out of town. They want me. And I'm not going to be caught. So Dennis, he goes into the living room back to where he unloaded his parka and gets the plastic bags. When he walks back into the master bedroom and everybody sees that he's carrying these plastic bags, they start to struggle and strain against their ties because this is terrifying. Why do you have these bags? What are you going to do with these bags? And Dennis had never killed anybody before, but he knew Joe needed to go first. He was the one that could potentially cause conflict for Dennis and make him lose control of the entire situation. So he takes this plastic bag and he ties it over Joe's head and he cinches it with a cord. Then he proceeds to climb on the bed and he takes another cord and starts to strangle Julie, the mother. When she loses consciousness, he thought she's dead. And when he gets off the bed, he sees Joe, he's moving again and he's trying to chew a hole through this plastic bag. So Dennis gets up and he finds something like a t-shirt, very heavy material kind of. T-shirt's not really heavy, but back in the day they were a little bit denser. They weren't as soft. And he ties this around Joe's head once more. What Dennis didn't ever really realize with this being his first murder is how long it takes to strangle or suffocate someone. So with the t-shirt now tied over Joe's head, over the plastic bag, he has a belt cinched around the t-shirt. Joe is struggling. He's pulling against his hands and his feet. He's trying to break loose. He's struggling to fight for his life. And then after several moments, Joe stops moving. Now he wants time with Josie. And Dennis climbs on the bed and the girl is screaming for her mama. And then asks Dennis, what did you do to my mama? And Dennis, he climbs off the bed. Now it's said that at that point he attempted to strangle Josie and she lost consciousness. And when he gets off the bed, he goes to Joey and he puts a bag on Joey's head. And in his mind, the plastic bag is enough to do the job, do the trick, whatever. What he didn't realize is the amount of time it would take for not only them to lose consciousness, but to actually die due to the lack of oxygen because of the plastic bag. He did not take that into effect. He also did not take it into effect that it took quite a bit of force and time to actually strangle someone to death. And so he hears Julie from the bed screaming, "You killed my boy. You killed my boy." And so he gets back up, pounces on the bed on top of Julie, takes a pillow and smushes it over her face. And he holds it until she no longer moves. And he feels she's surely dead this time. Dennis gets up and he's looking around, and in his mind, he's killed 4 Otero family members until Joey starts to move again. Dennis picks Joey up and he carries him into another bedroom, and it's the bedroom that Joey shares with his brother, Danny. And Dennis puts Joey on the bed and he goes and he finds a t-shirt and a pillowcase and he wraps these things around Joey in his neck where his plastic bag is. Then Dennis goes and moves a chair to just inside the doorway of the bedroom where he sits and watches as Joey rolls around, struggling against his ties and against the things over his face. Joey eventually rolls himself completely off the bed and into the floor, and in just a few moments, he shudders and then he goes still. When Dennis goes back to the master bedroom, there on the bed is Josie, and she's conscious. And this excites Dennis because for him, this is an encore. He now finally gets to have his way with one of the Otero women, which is what he wanted from the beginning. He wanted to walk into their home, kill the son, kill Joey, 9. Joe, the father's not to be home, and he's going to have all the time in the world with Julie and Josie. But that plan did not work out. It was not the plan he wanted from almost the moment he began. But now she's conscious. Now I'm going to have my way with her. So Dennis pulls Josie up to her feet and he forces her through the house to the stairs that lead to the basement. And she asks him, "What's going to happen to me?" And Dennis honestly answers her with, "By tonight, you're going to be in heaven with your family." Josie walks down the steps to the basement where Dennis proceeds to hang her from a hangman's noose with about 4 or 5 turns. He strips her of her clothes, her panties around her ankle, and he cuts her bra in the middle. Dennis masturbates and leaves semen on a thigh and in a puddle near her body on the floor. Dennis does take Joe's watch and a stereo. He didn't need either one of these items. He wanted a trophy. He wanted something to remind him of what just happened inside this home. He committed murders 1 through 4. He had sexual gratification. He was able to live out one of his fantasies. He did not want to forget this. By 10:30 that morning, neighbors saw a man leaving in the Otero station wagon. It was not Joe. It was not Julie. It was no one of the Otero family. Witnesses say that there was a lone driver. He was possibly Middle Eastern with longish dark hair. Dennis drove a few blocks away from the Otero home, parking the station wagon in the parking lot of a Dillon's. And once he gets out of the station wagon, he shifts the seat to throw police off from his actual height. And when he gets out of the car, there's a lady who had watched Dennis pull into the parking lot and get out of the vehicle. And she says she remembers him looking almost ill. Dennis was sweating profusely. He was nervous. He was not sure what to do next. He never really honestly thought he was going to get this far. He wanted to. He wished for it. He was hoping. But now that he's here, it almost seemed like it was going to be a dream, or it was a dream. So Dennis gets into his vehicle and then it hits him. He left his knife behind. And that knife could offer fingerprints to police if it's found. So in Dennis's mind, parking his personal vehicle a few blocks away did not put him or anything that could identify him at the crime. But now he's left this hunting knife behind, so he's got to go back and he's got to get it. Otherwise, he won't get away with this, right? So he takes his car and he drives it, and he goes over to the Otero home and he parks his car kind of behind the garage so you can't see it. He gets out, jumps the fence, finds his knife, gets back in his car and takes off. And now at this point, he takes 2 pain relievers because he has this headache. And this headache would be more of a product of the excitement, the adrenaline, all of that coming to a head. And now everything's trying to settle in the body. It's trying to go back to some sort of normalcy. And as a result, he's got a headache. So he takes a couple pain relievers and then goes home. And that afternoon, he burns everything. He burns his parka, he burns his clothes, the gloves, everything. It's gone. Get rid of it. Nothing to tie him back to the Otero murders. At 3 p.m. that afternoon, Danny and Carmen are walking home to 803 North Edgemore. This address will forever be linked to the first day of terror ruled by the Wichita, Kansas serial killer, BTK. When Danny and Carmen walk to the front door, they go to open it and it doesn't open. It's locked. So the two go around to the back and they notice that Lucky's outside, which isn't normal because if they leave Lucky outside, he barks at everybody who walks by in the neighborhood. The only time he's put outside is if there's a visitor in the home. Well, they can't get into the front door. The kids are already sensing something is wrong. Something doesn't make sense here. So they go into the kitchen through the back door, and there on the counter is the bread, is the potted meat, unfinished sandwiches and lunches for Joey and Josie. Their father's wallet is strewn across on top of the stove. They go into the living room. Their mother's purse's contents is strung all over the place. There was an obvious person inside their home that didn't belong. And so Danny and Carmen, they start calling out for their parents, for their mom, for their dad, for somebody. And they walk into the master bedroom and they're greeted with their father's lifeless body on the floor. Their mother is on the bed with her legs hanging off. She has a gag in her mouth and she is not moving either. Danny, he goes to the kitchen and he grabs a knife and he comes back in and he's trying to cut away his father's bindings. Carmen has pulled the gag out of her mother's mouth and she has nail clippers and she's trying to clip through the blind string, the Venetian blind cords that are wrapped around her neck. When Joe doesn't move after having the cords removed, Danny goes to the kitchen and tries to call 911. When he picks up the phone, there's no dial tone. The phone's not working. Charlie finally comes home from school and he sees that the garage door is open, but the car is gone. So he feels like his mother forgot to close the garage. So he closes the garage and goes into the home through the back door. Once he's inside the home, he finds Danny and Carmen, and they are on the floor crying. Danny tells Charlie that the phones aren't working and their parents aren't moving. Charlie leaves the home, goes to the neighbor's house. His name is Dale Johnson. This is where Charlie tells him the phones are not working and my parents aren't moving. And Dale Johnson calls 911 at 3:40 p.m. January 15th, 1974. Bulla and Jim Lindbergh, they are first to arrive at the Otero home. Charlie, Carmen, and Danny are outside waiting for police to show up. When Bulla and Jim go into the home, they find Joe Otero on the floor and a very large kitchen knife is laying next to him. Julie is on the bed, her legs hanging off. Both of their hands are tied behind their back. Neither one have a pulse. Rigor mortis is already beginning to set in, confirming that both of them have been dead for several hours. Bulla calls into dispatch and lets them know they have possibly 2 murder victims. And at this point, that's a shock in itself. Shortly before 4 p.m., Lieutenant Jack Watkins arrives on scene and him and Bulla begin to walk the Otero home. They find 9-year-old Joey in another bedroom on the floor with a bag, pillowcase, and t-shirt over his head. His hands and ankles are bound. Lieutenant Watkins finds it very odd that right inside of the doorway in the carpet are impression marks from what looks to be a chair, 4 chair legs, indicating that someone sat there and watched Joey slowly die. Bulla, he takes his flashlight and he goes down the stairs into the basement. He doesn't want to touch light switches. He doesn't want to leave behind his fingerprints or contaminate the scene in any way. And as he makes his way down the stairs, he's shining his light and he sees there's, typical unfinished basement, storage, and then the beam of light catches Josie hanging from the pipe. Bulla says that the way that she hung, her toes were barely above the floor. It was almost like she was able to hold herself up for some time before she became weak, and then she would lose that grip and she would fall, therefore causing herself to pass out. When she regained consciousness, she would try to stand on her toes again until she became too weak. And this was a process that just started over and over until Josie eventually passed. Her bra was cut down the middle. Her panties were down around her ankles. Her hands were tied around her back. A cord was tied from her hips down to her knees, finally ending around her ankles. It was one continuous cord. Josie's tongue had pushed out past a piece of towel that was serving as a gag. What the hell happened in the Otero home? They don't know. This was something Wichita PD had never seen before. This was a murder like no other murder they've ever worked. What's the motive? Why execute this family in this manner on this day? The family's things was rifled through. The drawers were pulled out. It was, I'm going to say obvious with air quotes, because it was obvious that somebody was in the home looking for something. However, we know, hindsight, it was made to look that way. It was made to throw them off. And due to the amount of things that were available to them as far as technology went, they didn't have a whole lot to go on. So why kill them in this manner? What were these people looking for? That's what they had to go on. They had to go on what the scene presented. What were they searching for? Is there something in the home that maybe didn't belong to the Oteros and they were refusing to give it away or give it back? I don't know. At this time, processing crime scenes were not the way we process crime scenes now. There was no walking a grid. There was no immediately identifying pieces of evidence. You walked into this, and if you had walked into this today with the children going in the room and cutting away binding and removing gags and just sitting all over the floor, that entire crime scene was contaminated. But back then, that's not how they viewed these. This, to get to where we're at today, there's progression, there's growth, there's trial and error. And this crime scene, there was nothing to go on except for what it looked like it was. And it looked like somebody had sought out the Oteros for something specific in their home. And with the way the marks were on the body, it looked like someone strangled them until they lost consciousness, brought them back, then strangled them again. A form of torture. But, we really know it was a lack of experience on the killer's part because he had no idea how long it was going to take to actually snuff out somebody's life, right? But they're seeing multiple points of strangulation. They're seeing things all across the house. Things were, gone through. So let's ask the kids, they lived here. What could y'all have that somebody would want? And so it was pointed out that Joe Sr. was in the Air Force, and when he was in Panama, there was a chance that he worked for some covert activities. So, okay, what was Joe involved in when he was down in Panama? What does he know that somebody would come in and torture his family in order to get him to talk? Maybe that's what they're seeing in this crime scene. Does Josie's hanging in the basement, is it exposing that this is truly a sex crime instead of a robbery? Or was it a robbery that turned into a sex crime? We have all these questions coming from investigators. Where do we start? Where do we look? Where what direction do we go in? And that's because the scene is so chaotic because it was Dennis Rader's very first time to kill a human being. So the crime itself was chaotic. Therefore, this impeded investigators in trying to piece this whole crime together. This is one of the worst things they've ever seen, especially when they went into the home. They expected 2 adults to be dead and instead found 2 adults and 2 children in this odd execution style. Here's the thing that investigators did know about this crime scene. They thought they knew anyways, that there was no way one person contained this entire crime. No way did one person brutally murder 4 people. And Chief Floyd Hannon, he seemed to be very positive that the semen found on Josie's thigh was not something premeditated by this group of killers. It was something spontaneous, saying that the perpetrator didn't realize that this was going to be a sexually motivated crime until he was sexually aroused. And he's right. I mean, I don't think at the time that Dennis thought he was going to go in and masturbate to this, but he did know that he would be aroused by this activity because he was very, very aware of his very odd sexual desires. Investigators, almost from the get-go, are hitting brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. In Wichita, they decided to put together these 10 teams of 2 investigators on each team to try and solve this crime because it's leaving them all scratching their heads. They're not, what happened here? None of this is making sense. So a couple of detectives are sent out to Panama and sent out to Puerto Rico, where Joe and Julie are originally from. They're trying to find something, whether through his military background or their familial background in Puerto Rico. They're trying to find something to give them answers to why this heinous crime happened. And they find nothing. So as February fades into March and then into April, a theory begins to float around that maybe Joe had killed his family and then had tied himself up and put a bag over and t-shirt over his head with the intention of being found as a victim but surviving. Instead, he miscalculated the amount of time it would take to be found and inadvertently killed himself. But the more you looked at this evidence, the more unbelievable that theory was. It didn't hold an ounce of traction. Now, a fingerprint of an unknown assailant was lifted from the chair that had been possibly sitting in the hallway doorway of the bedroom where Joey was found. The only thing is fingerprinting during this time wasn't consistent. Not everybody who was arrested in Wichita, Kansas was fingerprinted. But from this point forward, they would be. Like I said before, investigation in 1974 was not the same as it is today in 2021. You make errors. You learn from those. And this unfortunately showed them how important fingerprinting criminals was. CODIS wasn't even a twinkle in somebody's eye at this point in time. But eventually, it would become one of the most utilized databases in law enforcement by far. I mean, it takes 10 seconds to upload a fingerprint, and that will run until it hits a match. They didn't have that. There wasn't this program. They were grasping at straws trying to solve this because they had a community that was in terror. They were living in fear of, could this happen again? And the community was right. It could happen again. The question was, when? Dennis, at home, he was reliving every moment of that crime to the best that he could. Every moment was played over and over and over. He had refined the details down to what truly mattered to him and what would continue to give him a sexual release. Eventually, Dennis began carrying hit kits in his car, ready to jump when the opportunity arose. But here's the thing with the murders from BTK. They were not all, I'm not going to say none of them weren't, not all of them were moments of opportunity. Dennis could not deal with the unknown. He had to plan everything out in order to make sure this goes over well and he maintains control, which control is very important to him. The only way he's going to get that satisfaction is if he maintains control throughout the entire event. So being opportunistic and just jumping out and deciding he's going to bind someone, torture them, and then kill them in order to be sexually pleased does not happen. However, he's not perfect. Once he's decided that he has refined the details of the Otero murders down to the very best that they could be, he sits down and he writes his manuscript for this murder, for this project. Now, when going through and sifting through Dennis Rader's things, he writes about every single murder. And each one of them have what's known as a project name. That's what he named them. The Otero's was called Project Little Max. He wrote the story out where Killer Rex took the lives of Joe and Julie and Josie and Joey, and he dated them as January 22nd, 1974, with the title Death on a Cold January Morning. Once he was done typing up the details, he locked them away, hid them from sight, and they were there for his eyes and his eyes only. On April 4th of 1974, Dennis had a new project, Project Lights Out. The high he was living on from the Otero murders, it was fading fast for him. And the fear that had come from the Otero murders with the community was beginning to fade from the public eye. Investigators, they're working around the clock trying to solve this. You've got the local newspaper, the Eagle. They've established an anonymous tipster line for anybody who wanted to call in and tell them anything that could potentially help the investigation. Eventually, there was a reward of like $5,000 attached to the person who could give them the lead that broke the case. But over some time, with some donations, that reward jumped to $7,500. But they never got anything that was a solid lead. They received hundreds of tips through this line, but none of them actually panned out to help them solve the crime. But Dennis, well, he can no longer live through the memories. He needs another high. A blonde 21-year-old had caught his eye from campus. At this point, he had time off from classes, and he decided it was time. So he found this blonde. She lived on East 13th Street, not too far from the university. And knowing anything else about her, Dennis virtually didn't know. He didn't do a whole lot of research on this one, and by God, that's his own fault. He probably should have, but he didn't. His idea, well, I'm going to walk up, I'm going to knock on the door, and when she answers, I'm going to tell her I'm a student. I'm going to have with me my books from classes, and I'm going to tell her I need a quiet place to study, and then I'm going to force my way into the home. He goes and he knocks on the door at East 13th Street. No one answers. And Dennis thinks, hey, this is even better because I can do a B&E and I can sit and wait for her to come home. So he goes around to the back door and he busts through the screen door and then eventually punches through the glass in the back door to get inside. And then he starts to chastise himself because how could he do something so stupid? If she was to come home and see the glass, she would leave. Any sane person would not go in that home. So Dennis cleans up his mess and tries to make it the least bit suspicious that he can after putting his fist through a pane of glass. So Dennis, he goes through the home and he starts looking for things to bind her with. We can use scarves, nylon, stockings, belts, whatever. No blind cords because he did not want this murder to be associated with the Otero murders. So there were no blind cords that he was going to use for this time. Another fault was Dennis didn't bring much of his own gear. He had some rubber gloves and he had his coveted .22 handgun. That was it. So once he gets in the home and he identifies some things that he can bind her with, he sets and waits. And he takes his .22 out, turns the safety off, and immediately the gun discharges. And this pushes Dennis and his nerves over the edge because now we can smell gunpowder. And who's going to come into the home with that smell in the air? They're going to know someone's in there. They're not going to come in. I'm going to lose this opportunity. What am I going to do? Dennis is a nervous wreck. And he can't seem to calm himself down while he lays and waits for Kathy to get home. In comes Kathryn Bright with a man, and Dennis hears them talking. And from what he did know about Kathryn, she lived alone. Who's this person that's with her now? This isn't part of the plan. Nevertheless, Dennis, he jumps out, points the pistol at them, and tells them to hold it right there. I'm a wanted man from California. They have wanted posters out for me. I need a car. I need money. I just need to get to New York. I'm going to tie you up, but I don't want to hurt you. And this kind of freaks Kathy and her brother Kevin out. And he's not really sure what is going to happen, and neither are they. So he takes them into the bedroom. He still has his pistol drawn and pointed at them, and he instructs for Kevin to tie Kathy's hands behind her back. And he does so, and then Dennis ties Kevin's hands and ankles to the bedpost in that bedroom. Then he takes Kathy out of that bedroom and into another one, and he finds a chair, and he takes some nylon, and he ties her to the chair. Now, he asks Kevin for money, and Kevin gives him the $3 that he had in his right shirt pocket, but he does not tell him that he has $8 in his wallet. Kevin didn't want to give him all the money he had. And so once Dennis has money, which is something he told them that he wanted, he turns the radio up. And he learned this from the Otero murders that there's quite a bit of gurgling noises when you're strangling someone. And he didn't want to alert the other to him killing them. So once the radio's up, he goes into the bedroom where Kevin is tied to the bedpost. And he takes a piece of nylon, wraps it around Kevin's neck, and he begins to pull. And then Project Lights Out falls apart fast. Kevin breaks through the bindings that he was tied up with, and he's able to jump up and charge at Dennis. However, his hands are still kind of tied behind his back, so he only has the force of his feet and his body. Dennis pulls out his .22 and fires. It shoots Kevin in the forehead, and Kevin goes down, and blood begins to pool around Kevin on the floor. And at this point, Kathy is screaming. She's wanting to know what's going on with her brother. She's heard the gunfire. She's completely terrified. And Dennis needs to regain control of the situation. So, like he did with the Otero murders, if I can calm her down, I can regain that control. So he goes in there and he tells her, I had to shoot him. He's not hurt. As soon as I leave, I'm going to call the cops. They'll come and tie you and take care of your brother. And Kathy, she's fighting restraints. She's fighting and fighting and fighting, trying to get out. But remembering the Oteros and how they did not die immediately, Dennis decides he's going to go and check on Kevin. So he goes back into the room where Kevin is, kicks Kevin, and at that point, Kevin jumps back up and charges at Dennis, and he breaks free his hands that were tied behind his back. At this point, a struggle ensues. Dennis and Kevin are fighting over the pistol, and Kevin, he's trying to pull the trigger in hopes that he can get it to fire and hit Dennis. However, Dennis, he gets the upper hand, takes a step back, fires the .22, and shoots Kevin in the face. Kevin goes down for a second time. At this point, Dennis, he takes a deep breath and he goes back in there, and it's his time with Kathy now. It's her turn. And he grabs a piece of cloth and begins to wrap it around Kathy's neck. And as he pulls, Kathy breaks free from her bindings in the chair. And it's at this point, Dennis is like, I should have brought my own stuff. I don't know this stuff. It's not holding. The situation is not going. This is not my fantasy. And him and Kathy begin fighting. And Dennis punches her in the face, and he punches her in the head and in the shoulders. And eventually, there's enough distance brought between them that Dennis can pull out a knife, and he just wildly begins stabbing Kathy. And then he hears the front door open. And he realizes Kevin's not dead. He's been shot twice in the head, and he's still not dead. And now he's out of the house, which means he's going to tell, I'm going to be caught. This is the end of this. So he stabs Kathy a few more times, collects his knife and his pistol, and he leaves the home. He has no time to clean up like he did after the Otero murders. He has no time to grab any trophies. This did not go one step his way. The whole scene is just chaos. And for Dennis, all this does is make him sick. There's no gratification for him. There's no pleasure. There's nothing for Dennis Rader and the monster that lives inside of him. This whole thing blew up in his face. So Dennis, he's out the back door the way he came. He makes it all the way back up the block to where he's parked, and he gets out of there because there's no way that somebody doesn't know what was going on in that house at this point because Kevin got out. Kevin, he ends up finding William Williams and Edward Bell across the street, and he tells them, there is a wanted man in our house. He broke in. He shot me, obviously, and he's back there hurting my sister. We need help. And so they call 911, and Kevin he's transported to a local hospital, and they're treating him for his very obvious injuries. He was shot in the forehead, but the bullet just seemed to graze the skin. But with that skin around your head being very paper thin, it's also very vascular. And so there's a lot of blood from a very minor injury. However, When he was shot in the face, he was shot in the upper lip and it hit his teeth and ricocheted off, therefore saving him. What could have been very deadly. Patrolman Dennis Landon is first on scene, and when he peers into Kathy's home, he sees her laying on the floor deep inside the house. At that point, he decides it's appropriate for him to enter the home. When he gets to Kathy, he asks her, "Who did this?" Kathy says, "Don't know." He says, "What's your name?" She says, "Kathryn Bright." "How old are you?" 21. And before Kathy loses consciousness, she tells Landon, "Help me." As Landon is looking her over, waiting on paramedics to arrive at the scene, he sees not only has Kathy gone cold and clammy, she's starting to turn blue. And from what he can tell, there's 3 very apparent puncture wounds to her abdomen. Kathy is transported to the same hospital that Kevin was being treated at. And upon further observation of her body, she has 3 stab wounds in her abdomen and 11 in her back. Kathy does not make it through surgery. Kevin, he does. He survives to tell the tale of BTK. At this point, the Bright murder and the Oteros have yet to be linked. And like I said before, investigators are now struggling to solve the Otero murders. For every day that they go unsolved, the colder the case becomes, until they round up some guys. And then BTK decides, they're not getting credit for what I did. So what does he do? He writes out the letter that we heard from the beginning of this episode. And on October 22nd, he calls the Eagles secret witness tip line that they had set up for the Otero murders. And he says this: "Listen and listen good, because I'm not going to repeat it. There is a letter about the Otero case in Applied Engineering Mechanics book in the public library." The call is disconnected. The person who took the call retrieves the letter. The serial killer, BTK, is born. The people of Wichita lived in a bubble. Nothing ever touched their lives like these brutal slayings had. A place where locks were left undone, windows left open to offer a breeze in the middle of a summer night. Now locks were closed tight, windows sealed and locked. Phones were being picked up and checked to see if they were still working after being gone from the home all day. Women and men alike were on edge. The safety of their families and themselves was priority number 1. Dennis Rader, a member of their community, a man blending in so well, was the one at fault for all of the fear beginning to take over everyone. The murder of Kathryn Bright didn't match the same as that of the Oteros, but the anonymous caller to the tip line was going to play a far bigger role in the investigation for both murders and investigators who were not ready for what was to come. I want to thank you all for joining me tonight as we dive into the case that shocked the nation when 30 years of terror came to a close in the early years of a new millennium. Dennis Lynn Rader's 30-year reign of terror is just beginning. I will leave you with one last line. Self-control is the balance between inner wisdom and outer control. Much love, the True Crime Librarian.